There we go. So I've got a lot of different ways of presenting the information that I learned about great horned owl vocalizations. And there's the dry, boring version. There's this many kinds of hoots, this many kinds of chitters, this many kinds of squawks. And you can just kind of roll it out in a sterile scientific presentation, or this is the fun version. This is how I found out the information about the vocalizations, or a lot of them. So it's kind of the juicy version that's the behavioral and vocal interactions of 20-some captive and wild great horned owls over the last 19 years. So saddle up. This is literally a soap opera. So it all starts with Alice the great horned owl. She's the one I got in 1998. She fell out of her nest in the city of Antigo, Wisconsin in 1997. Permanently messing up her left wing. So she actually damaged the end of her humerus, the growth plate. So her wing grew in a little bit twisted. It was severely dislocated. They were able to reduce that, but they knew she was never going to be able to fly. So you can see she's got that droopy wing there, and she's never been flighted. But because she was injured so young, they figured she was a good candidate for an education bird. So I got her the fall of 1998. So this is Alice in territorial hoot posture. Many people maybe don't realize what they look like when they hoot, but they lean forward like a giant frog, puffing out their throat. They cock their tail up like they're a house wren on steroids, and their mouth is shut when they hoot. It's not open, it's shut. That's how you make the ooh sound. If their mouth opens during a hoot, it makes an aha sound, not the hoo sound. So this is what Alice's hoot sounds like. So hopefully everybody could hear that. If not, if somebody could pop back on and wave at me if you can't see it or hear it. You got it? All right. So this is how spectrogram works. You've got the time axis down here. You've got the frequency or the pitch over here. So if it's really high, it's up here. If it's really low, it's down here. So as we're looking at this, this is hoo, 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 hoo. And I've heard Alice do this, I'm sure, a million times over the years. Because I didn't intend to do this, but inadvertently she wound up living in a room in the house with an outdoor porch also. When she was after I had her about a year, she developed some intestinal issues and was losing weight, and it was winter, and I thought, oh, I can't have you outside. And I had been a falconer, so I had a room in the house done up for my kestrel, because weight management on a kestrel, you can't do very well outside in winter when you're trying to fly them. So I didn't have a bird, so I just changed the perches, moved her in there, and oh, she thought that was great because she was a human imprint. She wanted human attention, and she could talk to me then whenever she wanted to. So when she was better within a few weeks, I thought, well, geez, it's January. I can't throw you back outside now. So she wound up staying in there. And anyway, so we've got this really close relationship over the years because she literally lives in a room in the house that's done up for her. Does not look like a normal room. Anyway, so I've heard this a gazillion times. So when her hormones started kicking in after a few years and she's looking for a mate as an imprint, she's looking for a human. I was there. So she's doing all of her vocalizations towards me and basically getting mad because she's expecting me to respond as a male great horned owl, and I don't know how to do it right. So I kind of, in self-defense, went to the scientific literature to figure out, what do they say, in what context, what am I supposed to be doing, and found out nobody had ever really studied their vocalizations, which baffled me because they're a ridiculously common species all over North America, but that's probably why they're not studied. There's lots of funding to study rare species, not common species. So with some encouragement, I started doing that in 2004 with a good old-fashioned tape recorder, because this is before digital was really a serious thing. So I literally had a tape recorder that I was using. So bear with me. These are older recordings with a tape recorder. And this was the first owl that I heard in my yard. And I realized her hoot was significantly different than Alice's. So if we go back to Alice's, you see there's kind of one note by itself here. Then there's a cluster of notes, and then a long separation, one note, one note. So these are basically the four parts of a great horned owl hoot. This is always a single note. This is always a single note. In a female, this can be 1, 2, or 3 notes. And in a female, this is usually 3 or 4, like kind of a triplet. And in a male, it's different. So you can tell them not just by pitch, but by rhythm, the sex. So this one had 3 notes in the second to the last part consistently. And I realized, hey, wow, I can tell this bird as an individual. Now, is the bird banded? No, I just know it by voice because it's in this location. This is what she always sounds like. So her voice got really hoarse for about a month. I wound up naming her Wheezy just because of that. So I had a way to refer to her. Like scientifically, you don't name birds, so I could have named her some bizarre number and letter combination that would have meant nothing to anybody. And since I work in education, I'm all about let's make this information easy to understand and relatable. So I gave the birds names because they didn't have a number to refer to them by. Shortly after I recorded her, then my neighbors who have a chicken coop called me and said, hey, we got an owl in the chicken coop. Do you want to come get it? And I knew what they would have done, which would not have been good. So I scooted over there and this owl was totally freaked out in the chicken coop and I was able to actually go over and grab him. Now, how do you tell male from female in great horned owls? By voice, it's much easier, but I did not know that at this point in time. Males are smaller than females in a given area, but their heads are about the same size. So a male looks like he has a fatter head for the size of his body than a female. So a male looks more like a barrel and the female more like a bowling pin. But that's based on how they're holding their feathers because they can puff their heads out, they can slick them down. So in general, relaxed pose. This one, I was guessing was a male. I'm not 100% sure. That was a guess. But so I figured if he's in this area, it must be her mate. And the male that I recorded in the area, I named Wendell. So we had Wendell and Wheezy. Here's what his hoot was like. So males can have this nice little pickup note here, but otherwise it's kind of single notes. So this is kind of a standard male hoot in the eastern US. Not much later, just on the other side of that farm, another male started hooting and he had this really sexy vibrato hoot. So even just with what I've said, you could probably tell all of these owls apart without much problem if you had a spectrogram in front of you. So they all sound slightly different. So this was really interesting to realize that they're vocally distinct as individuals, but it makes sense because they need to know who their neighbors are. They need to know who the strangers are. So if their neighbor is hooting, you don't get too bent out of shape if they are where they're supposed to be. But if you have a total stranger show up, whoa, you're going to get bent out of shape and run them off because they are not supposed to be there. So here we had a territorial battle happen. So this new guy with the vibrato kept moving closer and closer and closer till he was literally in the yard with Wendell and they were kind of hooting it out. And Wheezy was kind of off in the background being the cheerleader doing this hoo, 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 really high pitched, loud, increasing in pitch. So bear with me. This is with a handheld tape recorder, but you can kind of see what's going on. So that's Victor's vibrato. And then we wrap down here. That's Wendell. That's Wheezy. And you can probably guess based on the names who won that battle. That was Victor. Basically, he kicked Wendell and Wheezy out of their existing territory, shoved them off conveniently just to the edge of my property. So that was a territorial boundary. So now there's a whole lot of hooting going on right at that boundary. So that was pretty cool. And then eventually Victor's mate showed up. We named her Virginia. Scientific name is Bubo virginianus. So her name was Virginia. And she realized Alice was in the house and did not like having another female in her territory. Now, Alice is a very confident bird. There is no minority complex going on there. She knows nobody can get her. So she sits in her second story room, staring out the window, hooting. And Virginia came, landed on the antenna on top of the garage so she could look straight in the window at Alice and hoot at the top of her lungs. So that's much higher frequency than usual, much louder than usual, because she's mad. There's another female in her territory that she can't run off. Well, eventually she figured out, okay, Alice isn't going anywhere and she's not going to mess with her. So she kind of chilled out a bit. But this whole territorial thing was going on in February when they should have been laying eggs. So I don't think either pair nested that year because there was so much commotion going on. So that summer, I didn't find nests or babies, but I did hear some really weird sounds. So imagine in the middle of the night hearing this. And that kept going on and on and on, interspersed with those hoo, 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 hoo. And gradually it segued into Victor's normal hoots. And I thought, whoa, that is weird. Because by then I had collected all the sound recordings. This is before everything was online, from Cornell and Bohr Lab of Bioacoustics and a bunch of other recordists. And nobody had a recording of anything like this coming out of a great horned owl. What did it mean? Good question. But I had a recording of it. And then I heard this repeatedly, not once like it was an aberrant thing, but repeatedly. I mean, like you would just think that's a dog, except that was up in the top of a tree. And again, it gradually segued into Victor's normal hoots. So very weird. Again, nobody had a recording of this, but I didn't know what it meant either. In 2006, West Nile virus swept across Minnesota and just kind of slaughtered great horned owls. And my Norwegian bachelor neighbor down the road, who has a musical ear, who would keep track of the owls for me because he could tell them apart by voice also. And he would keep notes of which owls he heard. So he called me and said, hey, I've got this owl on the ground that can't fly. I don't know if you're interested. Well, of course, it's one of our research birds. So I run over there. I have no idea which bird it is because I know them by voice. They're not marked in any way. And in this context, they're not going to hoot. If they've got people around them, there's two things they should do. They should hiss. And just like a cat, it means back off, leave me alone. And the other thing that's even more intense is rapidly snapping their bill together. It sounds like an old typewriter. And that means like, get the bleep out of here. And this bird wasn't doing either. So we sent the bird up to the Raptor Center. They were pretty sure it had West Nile virus. And I'm like, this is one of my research birds. Can you please do everything possible? And in the meantime, I'm listening, going, which owl am I not hearing? Because they did keep it alive and tried to do what they could. The bird went completely blind, was vicious in captivity. They actually had to have a warning sign on her because she was that vicious. And the owl I was no longer hearing was wheezy. And after a month, they said, this bird will not ever recover. The only thing we can do is put her down. So they did a necropsy, confirmed it was a female and confirmed it was West Nile virus. And I never heard wheezy again. So we knew exactly when we lost her and when Wendell became single. And basically Victor and Virginia then just ran Wendell off after that. So it was just Victor and Virginia for quite a while, for a few years. And I was trying to record other owls also, but I realized the only way I could get everything, their whole repertoire, was a captive breeding pair, because you can have the best webcam on Earth, but you only get what's going on at the nest. You don't get what's going on the rest of the year. And they don't have recorders that you can put on like transmitters on an owl and fly around and catch it, that kind of stuff. So I realized I needed a captive breeding pair. So in 2010, I got Rusty and Iris. Rusty's the dark little guy in the back. Iris is the big pale one in the front. They came from the Raptor Education Group, both with eye issues, so they could fly. They kind of met in rehab and sort of self-selected each other. And I got them as a breeding pair. We built a 96-foot-long breeding and release training facility for them, outfitted it with security cameras so we could basically spy on them. We got them in the fall of 2010, and owls don't do change well, so hoping they were going to breed the first year was kind of hoping for a miracle, but we're still looking for breeding behavior. So one thing that happens is the male will feed the female, because in owls, there are very strict sex roles. The female does all the incubation, the male does all the prey deliveries until those kids are old enough to be receiving whole prey from dad. So this is one of the things that the male does. He will bring food to the female as part of like, hey, I'm a good provider. There's plenty of food around here. So here's Rusty bringing a chunk of gopher to Iris. And that sound that he's making, that little kind of clucky grunty, those clucky chitters are only given in the context of the nest. So if he's making that sound, you know he's either bringing food to Iris or he's digging in the nest. Those are the only two contexts that he would give that in, or right around the nest. So here's him digging in the nest. They don't build a nest, but the male basically shows the female all the potential nests in the territory. And he does that by getting in the nest, he kind of bites into the substrate and digs with his feet, and sometimes with those clucky sounds going on. In this particular case, he's not clucking, but. So basically kind of making a nice little nest bowl. So good, he was doing all kinds of things that he should do. And then the deed that we're looking for, copulation. And in great horned owls, it is not pretty. It's wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. And it was interesting. So we live streamed the video so that we could have the people who were watching help with observation. So they weren't just watching and saying, oh, isn't this cool? But they were actually helping to document the vocalizations and behaviors. And all the people watching the cam could tell when Rusty was interested because he changed his hoots. They called him his Barry White hoots because he would drop his frequency, so it was a little bit lower, a little slower, and sometimes he'd leave notes off the end. And he would sit and look at Iris across the aviary and do his oh, 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 oh. Ooh. And he'd keep doing that until Iris kind of gave permission. She'd do this little girly hoot, ooh, 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 ooh. And then Rusty would get excited and do these staccato hoots. Ooh, 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 ooh. Then he flies over, lands on her back, and then she has to get her tail out of the way. He wraps his down and around, and they call it the cloacal kiss when the sperm is transferred. And it took me forever to figure it out, and watching like 5 zillion copulation sequences, there's a high-pitched scream that happens at the end. I thought it was the female because she's got 8 talons in her back. There's reason for her to scream. Nope. It's the male that does the high-pitched scream when he's successful with copulation. Sometimes he won't do that if he has to abort because he didn't land right, but females don't give them much time. You better get on, get it done, and get out of there, because if you didn't get it right, you got to have a do-over. There's no time to, oh, hey, let me readjust here. Great horned owls don't do that. So here's what it looks like. So that's it. That's what it looks like. Then this owl showed up just when I was getting optimistic that things were looking good for eggs. Scarlet owl Hera showed up, a single female without a mate, and she was really hooty late into the morning, even during the daytime, driving our owls nuts, landing on the aviaries, hooting at them. Her hoot, incidentally, was very distinctive because the second to the last part of the hoot had 2 notes, unlike any of our other owls yet. So I'm in the house here. She got mobbed by crows a lot, and had a lot of words with Alice also. One day, this is 1:45 in the afternoon. I mean, you could slice the tension with a knife. So we're looking at Iris over here. Rusty's flying up to the perch. And if you look, their feathers are compressed, their ear tufts are straight up, they are upset. That squawk is Scarlet. Now watch the window over here. There's chain link. was intent to do bodily harm there. And she kept harassing them. She showed up in February, was there March, April, May, June. We didn't hear her in July, and I thought, hallelujah, she's gone. She's gonna, and they didn't lay eggs that year. She was just harassing them too much. And there was no owl around in July. I thought, excellent, we're doing great. And then this other female showed up the beginning of August. Here she is on top of the TV antenna, looking in the window at Alice. I'm in the house looking outside right next to Alice. And man, if looks could kill, it's tough to see her face, but have a look at that. That's a look that would kill. So she was so worked up, she'd put an extra note on the end of her hoot. So she was around well, actually right after that, I had to get ready for work, and I heard a thump, went upstairs, and she had smacked into a window so hard she injured her eye. This is just literally a few minutes after that last video. But she could still fly, nothing I could do. 2 days later, Scarlett came back, and this one was gone. It's like, geez, would you just leave our birds alone so they could breed? Well, that fall, Scarlett was heard half a mile west of here hooting with another guy. So of course we named him Rhett. Hallelujah, she never came back over here. So Rusty and Iris got busy. They laid eggs, but it was their first time having eggs together. They were injured as adults. They're completely wild, not used to humans. We have no idea if they had nested before in the wild with other partners, but it was their first time nesting together with us. And they were very skittish, even though their place was completely protected with wooden slats, chain link, plus screen on the outside, so double layer. Nothing could get in, predator barriers buried into the ground 2 feet. And her nest basket was like 8 or 10 feet off the ground. She got scared because we would have cats and raccoons walk around the base of the aviaries, because once she started nesting, we stopped cleaning in there. We didn't want to disturb her. So the poop and the pellets and leftover food kind of accumulated. So it smelled and things started coming around. So this is a cat walking around the bottom of the aviary during the day. It was the first time we could see there were 2 eggs in there, because Rusty had dug that nest bowl so nice and deep that the camera angle wasn't very good. So it's the first time we could see there was 2 eggs, but jostling around like that is not such a good thing for the eggs. And that happened a lot of times. They were due to hatch about a week before the Owl Fest. They hadn't hatched by Owl Fest, so we thought, oh, that's not very good. So because we had Denver Holt, the founder of the Owl Research Institute, Michael Wink, the guy who's done more genetic work on owls probably than anyone else in the world, and cam operator from South Africa, we're all there. I'm like, well, now's the time to figure out what happened. And so this is Denver opening up one of the eggs. You can see fully formed chick that just died before hatching. My husband's from the Netherlands, and he has a friend and colleague who studies unhatched eggs. How's that for a specific topic? So we sent him pictures, and he's pretty sure they overheated, because just before hatching, the chick has enough of a metabolism that mom has to sit a little bit higher. And if she sits too tight, she actually over incubates and overheats them, and they can get a red wash on them. And these did have a reddish wash on the front. Now they could have renested, they didn't, so we went another year without having babies. Then that next summer, another neighbor caught me after work one day in August, I think, July, August. He said, hey, I was working on my prairie, taking a dip down in the river, and there was an owl having a bath in the river. And I thought, in the middle of the day with you there, something's wrong. This is not okay. So we went over there. This owl was standing on the sandbar, not flying away. So my husband took off his shirt, threw it over her. I figured it was probably Virginia because she was kind of large based on where she was. But again, we know them by voice. And in this context, they're not going to hoot. Sent her up to the raptor center. She had a slice in her pectoral muscle with maggots in it. So that was cleaned up. But she died of an abscess in her leg a couple of weeks later. And I never heard Virginia again. So we knew exactly when Victor became single. And then about that time, we started hearing another female off in this direction. I thought, well, that's kind of a lot of owls to have in one area, and for lack of another name, named her Delilah, but she has this upslur in her hoots. So she was easy to identify because of that upslur. Well, 3 weeks after Virginia was gone, Victor, something was up. I could tell from the tone of voice, something was going on. So I started recording, and Delilah came over to hoot with him. So this is just 3 weeks after Virginia was gone. And I thought, man, what if Virginia would have been releasable? And, we sent her back, and Victor's already got a new babe. So this is Delilah and Victor hooting for the first time. It's August, so there's tons of insects calling. Sorry about that. But the interesting thing about that is they're hooting over top of each other. They're really excited. Normally, they're not hooting over top of each other like that. And I thought, woo, 3 weeks. That's pretty fast mate replacement. I was wrong, because shortly after that, Delilah was hooting with Rhett. I don't know where Scarlet went, but Delilah was hooting with Rhett. Yeah, so Delilah went back and forth between the guys. I guess if you're gonna mate for life, you probably want to date around a little bit. And she settled in with Rhett. So Victor stayed single. So Rhett and Delilah would come in the yard and they would hoot at Rusty and Iris, but they weren't as aggressive as some of the other owls. So Rusty and Iris got down to business. They laid 3 eggs, and I was excruciatingly happy that we were able to record the sounds in the egg before they hatched. We had an ultra-sensitive microphone less than 4 feet from where the bowl of the nest was. So these are the sounds. Well, you'll hear some other stuff too, but you'll hear the little peeps in the egg before it hatches. So we were ecstatic. We were going to have little owlets, and all 3 hatched. Super awesome. And it was great to have this live streamed, because then multiple people are watching things and listening to different things. So this was one evening when Rhett and Delilah were in the yard. Rusty and Iris were away from the nest, hooting at Rhett and Delilah. I was paying attention to the adults. Thankfully, one of the viewers was paying attention to the babies and saw that those little owlets that were about 2 weeks old, the 2 oldest ones, were hooting in their little teeny weeny squeaky voices, and they were doing it right. Their little heads were going forward just like the adults do. And if you can see them when they get a little bit older, the little tail stubs go up, even though they don't have any feathers on them at all other than fuzz. The little tail stump goes up. So it's the proper context. Owls are hooting. So there's no practicing. They just wham bam, do it correct the first time at about 2 weeks of age. So watch for their heads. So that was probably the most significant thing that we found, is that owlets can start hooting right about 2 weeks of age. And then they kind of stopped after about a month doing those little tiny squeaky hoots. And then when we separated them from the parents, when the kids turned out to be just total brats, when they were like literally smacking their parents off perches and driving them nuts, it's like, okay, time to shut the door between the flight pen and the breeding pen and give the parents some peace and quiet. Then the kids started hooting again. And it was hilarious because they sound just like teenage boys whose voices are breaking. So you hear adults first. How's that for hilarious? Couldn't take one of those kids seriously. So that's at about 5 months of age. And then it takes until they're 7 or 7.5 months of age before you can before they sound like full-fledged adults and are indistinguishable. And that's important because if you're doing acoustic surveys and you're saying, oh, I hear an owl hooting and you're assuming it's an adult, you need to know that a 7.5-month-old can sound exactly the same as adult. They're probably still doing begging calls, but they can do a hoot that's indistinguishable from an adult. And here's the kids at 7.5 months. They sound just like adults at that age. The next year, we were able to release them to the wild with transmitters on them so we could track them for dispersal and survival and see where they went. We were not able to get permits for release after that. So the next year, we hand reared them in captivity so we could look at the vocal development of a human reared bird versus a parent reared bird. We knew Alice was getting older and we needed younger education birds. So we thought, okay, this might fit both bills. So we've got Ruby and Rupert here. Here's Ruby and Rupert hatching out of the egg. That's them growing up. And here's them as education birds. Rupert didn't like the education gig that much, so he was moved into a breeding program, and Ruby does lots of our education programs now. So if you've been to the Owl Center, you've probably seen Ruby. Now, things outside started getting very soap opera-ish after this. This little red box is where the aviary is. This is the Root River Valley. So here's the Root River here. These are bluff tops over here. So here's the bottoms. Here's the bluff tops. So we have Victor down here, still single, Rhett and Delilah over here. And we had a pair show up on Christensen Hill over here. It's a nice steep hill, so we called them Jack and Jill because they were on the hill. And they always sounded a little bit excited. And then we had another pair show up over here. And since they were to the east and I was kind of running out of names, we named the male Eastman. And the female sounded a little bit like one of the owlets we had released. And the owlets were Pandora, Patrick, and Patience. So we just named the female P in case she happened to be one of our owlets. Eastman has a very interesting hoot. He usually leaves the last note off, like he can't be bothered to put it on, or he just kind of sometimes does. Hoo, 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 hoo. Mostly he leaves it off, but sometimes he puts it on completely. So it's important to know what their actual hoot is. And some individuals might put an extra note on or leave one off. But if you're comparing hoots, you've got to make sure you've got the actual 4-part hoot, or you're not going to have good results if you're comparing acoustics. So here's Eastman and P. So you can hear Eastman didn't put the last note on. So just when I thought this is an insane number of owls to have in one area, because there has to be enough food for all of them, then Hager and Helga barged right into the middle of all of it. And Helga's got that really nasal voice. And they were horrible, which is why we named them Hager and Helga. They shoved Rhett and Delilah out of the area, or they just left voluntarily, and they attacked Rusty and Iris's aviaries every single night, multiple times for over a year. We found out the hard way that aluminum insect screen, oh, talons just shred that. If they hit hard enough, they can actually punch through it. So it's good we had double layers. So here you can see Iris sitting down here, Rusty is over here, and watch the mesh over here. We had to switch to pet mesh because they bounce off pet mesh instead of shredding it. Rusty wasn't so helpful, but I mean, just wicked, just repeatedly slamming and slamming and slamming into it. And they just did that over and over and over and over and over again every night. Just insane, wicked birds. So then Rhett and Delilah kind of faded out of the picture. Victor faded out of the picture. Eastman and P moved down into the river bottoms. That kind of seems to be more desirable territory anyway. If given the option, they were down in the river bottoms instead of up on the bluffs. Then we had a new guy show up down by the neighbors. Mr. Lundberg was the high school principal, and Literally, there were two people watching our cameras that took dictation, what was said every night by every owl at what time. So they needed a name for every owl. And I just said, oh, that's down by Lundberg. So they just started calling him Lundberg. But he was single that first year. And then Jill disappeared the next year. And I was ecstatic. I'm like, yay, one of the super obnoxious owls. Oh, wait, hang on. Helga disappeared. One of the super obnoxious owls disappeared. So Hager was single, but this was interesting. So Hager would go over and hoot with Jill, who was taken, and hoot with P, who was taken, and he would even hoot with Alice, who's not interested in males with feathers. And Jill left Jack for Hager. That's not supposed to happen, is it? So Hager and Jill were a thing, and thankfully Jill wasn't aggressive like Helga. And Jack sort of disappeared that year. And then the next year, Hager disappeared. Yes. So then Jill was single. Well, that was interesting because we still had Rupert, and Rupert was, I think about 3 years old. And he hadn't hooted for several years because why would you? You don't have a territory, you don't have a babe. He started hooting because now there was a single girl around.
Remind me, what do we do? Which one is it?
So obviously he can't be with Jill because he's a captive bird and she's a wild one, but he was very interested. He would bring his food out, like he wanted to try and feed her, which he couldn't do through all the barriers. And then another single female showed up. We named her Lilith. She was not very nice. So we have 2 single females in the area. And this was interesting, but because we knew the vocalizations, even though we couldn't see what was happening, you could hear and then you knew what was going on. So in this clip, we're looking at
to the other person's language, like that an aggressive owl is quote unquote not very nice. Is like, what does that mean? It's an owl. Like, nice indicates intention about kindness and stuff. That's a human,
right?
So you're asking about owls being nice versus mean. When they attack, they're being mean. So you'll hear in this sequence, and with Hager repeatedly slamming into things. I mean, if you see a dog, you don't have to say, oh, that one's being nice, that one's being mean. I mean, if you're around it, you know it. I mean, you can say they have no emotions. If you've been around them enough, they absolutely do. And they absolutely have different personalities. They're not just objects out there that are just stimulus response things. They absolutely have different personalities and intentions. And I'll get into some other things later. But here we're looking at Rusty, and we'll hear what's going on outside. Somebody sent me a text message and said, are your owls okay? We hear screaming out there. So a screaming chitter is only done when they're physically being restrained. They're like, usually like you're physically holding one. So this was kind of interesting. I ran outside. I'm like, wait, what's going on? And I was looking for blood or something. It wasn't one of our birds. So Rusty and Iris are watching what's going on in the tree right outside of the aviary. And we can tell what's going on because we know the birds by voice. So you'll hear Jill hoot, you'll hear Lilith hoot, and then you're going to hear them hoot together. And then you're going to hear kind of a kerfluffle. And then you're going to hear screaming. And during the screaming, Lilith hoots. So you know that it's Jill doing the screaming. And the screaming was actually painful to listen to. It went on for like 5 minutes. So I don't have the whole thing on here. And then we didn't hear Jill for quite some time after that. But because you know the voices, you can tell what's going on. So that was Jill that we heard. Lilith is the loud one. So Lilith hooting during the screaming. And we didn't hear Jill for quite some time after that. And one of the things I should also say about intention, emotion, and things like that, when I go into Alice's room now, I'm not her primary person anymore. After she retired, she considers my husband to be her primary person. If I go in there, I get attacked. And I know I'm going to get attacked. The look on her face is, I am going to kill you. And that's exactly what she's trying to do while she's poking holes in my legs if I'm not wearing boots. Very intentional. Okay, so then shortly after this, when Lilith was harassing our birds, the neighbors called again. They had an owl in a chicken coop, and I thought, yes, this is probably Lilith. Let's get her out of here. She's harassing our birds. We have permission to breed again. So I went over there fully expecting it's going to be Lilith. And in the meantime, I'm thinking, oh, what am I going to do? I could drive her like 50 miles away from here. That's not legal, but like, who would know, right? Or I have a transmitter left. I could put that on her and see where she goes. I don't have permission to do that, but who would know? So I'm having these evil thoughts and like, well, should I do it? I probably shouldn't do it. And all this back and forth in my head. And I get there, it's a male. Like, why is there a small male first-year bird in this aviary when there are 2 single females here and he has never called? Why would he not call when there's 2 single females around? Nobody's ever documented a first-year male breeding before. First-year females on occasion breed, but a first-year male has not been documented breeding as far as I am aware. So I don't know if he just knew, hey, I'm too young, I don't have a territory, I can't call in a babe, but he didn't say anything because we can hear everything within about a half a mile radius, which is well within the range of where he was. So that was really interesting. So I just let him go. And you could tell it's a first-year male because he was really small. And his feathers were all 1 generation. It takes 3 or more years to replace all of the primaries and secondaries on their wings. So you'll see more faded feathers. Okay, so here's what we have now. We've got Jill single there, Lundberg single there, Eastman and P down there. Now, Jill moves up onto the hill. Lundberg gets a mate. So I asked Mr. Lundberg what he wanted his mate to be named, and he picked Heather. And Eastman lost his mate, so he was single that next year. And then there was another guy. It was in a place that was super hard to record, but it sounded like the male that was hooting with her was Jack, her original mate. And it's like, wait, like she left you and you took her back? Well, that's interesting. And then they disappeared. They must have probably moved farther up on the bluff. Eastman got a new girl. We named her J-Lo because she sounded like Jill, but with a lower voice. And then Alfred and Alma showed up. And Alfred would hoot and hoot and hoot and hoot. I mean, it was insane. He would start at 7 p.m. and hoot almost nonstop till 7 a.m. It's like, dude, don't you have to eat or something? And then things got really quiet for a few years. Eastman and J-Lo disappeared, Lundberg and Heather disappeared, and Alfred and Alma moved way down on the bottoms. And literally there were no wild owls in the area at all for a few years. Really bizarre. And then Aggie showed up. We named her Aggie because she was aggressive and aggravating, single female pestering our owls again. Here's what she sounds like. She was always worked up sounding. She's never like chilled out sounding. She's always like emphatic and excited when she's here. But then the beginning of 2022, we don't know how old Rusty and Iris are. They were adults when they came in. I'm trying to remember who was in there first. Iris was an adult in rehab by at least 2006. Rusty was at least by 2007. They both had eye issues. Rusty's had deteriorated, so one of his was removed. He injured his other eye with his limited vision, and that just gradually declined to the point where when he went completely blind, we had to have him put down. Iris was sitting on eggs at the time, so that was really interesting to see. We're providing food, so obviously she has plenty of food. All she's got to do is fly down to the food tray to get it. It just wasn't being delivered like Rusty was delivering it. And after 2 days, she abandoned and started calling and calling and calling and calling, like, where are you? And she is single now, and since she's officially on retired status, we've just been pulling the eggs. And they were infertile anyway. Rusty was shooting blanks the last several years. She once called in a wild male, and then Aggie came in, and I don't know if she was trying to go after him or ran him off or whatever, but he was only around a couple of days. And now Iris is single. So you can watch her online, and you can hear all the other owls online also, Aggie and any other wild ones that come around, as well as our other captive birds, because our other captive birds are housed within this vicinity. So you might hear an eagle owl calling or screech owl trilling, plus the wild owls in the area, or barn owl calling, things like that. One slide I did want to put on the end, since I was talking about our new center, I'm just going to throw this in before I ask for questions. We are working on building a new facility. These are the basic concepts of what we're looking at. So it'll be roughly a 22,000 square foot facility. These will be display only birds over here, 2-part aviaries. So for birds that need climate control, so they can choose if they want to be in a climate controlled space or in ambient temperatures. So basically 2-part aviaries. Education birds will be over here. They'll have more access to sunlight and sunshine than what this shows. These are preliminary also yet. Off display from the public. Program rooms are in here. And then the cool part is down in the park. We're going to have these walk-through aviaries. You don't walk in this part of it. This is where the birds fly. The people view from here, and there doesn't have to be anything in front of the people. The first time I heard about walk-through aviaries for owls, I'm like, you can't do that with raptors. You can do that with songbirds, but not with raptors. Well, it was a design pioneered in the Bavarian National Forest by Wolfgang Schertzinger. And when he told me about it, I'm like, what? Send me some pictures of your aviaries. And he said, I can't because they're so big and they're out in the middle of the forest. So he invited me to come over, and he's had them up for decades. So he knows every last little tiny detail. So they're designed using the owl's natural instincts, so they don't want to come where the people are. So that's what we're working on doing. So we'll have 6 of those for the owls that are native to this area. Okay, with that, I'm going to stop sharing and can take questions. Let me pull up chat here. So if people have questions, I think you want them to put them in chat.
Yeah, if they could, please, that would be
Okay.
best.
So I see one. Do I have a theory about why the local wild owls disappeared for a while? Absolutely no idea. So if there was less prey, that could be part of it, but you would think there'd be at least 1 pair around, because I mean, we've got at least half a mile radius that we can hear things in. And if we've had extremely high density, you would think there'd be at least something around, but it was just absolutely nothing. So I don't know.
Any other questions coming through?
What do you think? Maybe was there another bout of avian flu that came through, or
not at that time? I mean, the Raptor Center usually knows when there's a big wave of it. Like 2006 was horrible, and that's when we lost Wheezy. But I don't think there's been anything horrible. And usually I will also get dead birds and injured birds calls. We don't do rehab, but since the closest rehabber is in the Twin Cities, we get the calls. And I wasn't getting lots of calls of dead birds.
another one coming up about begging calls?
Yeah, the begging calls are extremely variable. So I could play you one recording, but another bird in another situation might sound totally different. And that individual will sound very different from the time it's young till the time it's independent of its parents. And I was just listening to some from our, we've got recording units that we put out in different locations to pick up wild barn owls. And then the juvenile great horned owl begging calls are in that same frequency range, so those come up. So this one was at the Hormel Nature Center. Oh my gosh, they sound great. Juvenile great horned owl is not the first thing that would come to mind because it was so squeaky and squealy and consistently so. So there's huge variation in what juvenile great horned owl begging calls sound like. And then the other thing to keep in mind is adults can do squawks also. So those can get confused with the juvenile calls. They're more mature sounding. But an adult female on a nest, if she's not getting enough food, can also do a begging call to her mate, calling to say, hey, bring food.
Yeah, I think you answered this one. Do your owls have trouble with crows chasing them?
Our wild ones absolutely do. Sure. Yeah. This time of year, we'll hear the crows going nuts, and it's like, oh, yeah, Aggie's over there right now, apparently. The captive ones don't, but the wild ones sure do.
I have a question about that because we had an observation at Silverwood where a Cooper's hawk chased off the crows for the owls.
A Cooper's hawk chased off the crows.
Yes.
Wow, that's a gutsy Cooper's hawk.
Yeah, but they cleared out, and then and so that was a bizarre scene at the nest.
Yeah, that's the cool thing about owls and birds. You never say never, because about the time you do, then they'll prove you wrong.
Next one. How many years have you been studying owls? What brought you to the species?
So I've been studying great horned owl vocalizations, I guess, for 19 years now. And what brought me to the species? Alice. I honestly was interested in red-tailed hawks before that. And when I was looking for an education bird, Alice is who was available. So I wound up with a great horned owl, and that's what started the studying of the great horned owls. So, you're just seeing kind of a part of the study. So there's the captive and the wild birds and Alice, and then there's going through all the sound libraries. So everything from Cornell and Xenocanto and individual recordus, and people are always sending me, and I love it when people send me owl calls and say, what on earth is this? Or can you tell me what this nocturnal sound is? And then you find out all kinds of other new things. So it's always a constant journey of learning. And there was some stuff, just when I think I know everything, then something else comes up. So I was at the World Owl Conference in Portugal in 2017. This guy comes up to me and he said, do you have a recording of their broken wing squeal? Like, great horned owls don't do broken wing displays. I mean, they're like top predator. They don't do broken wing displays. And he said, oh, yes, they do. I'm like, what? And he said, come out banding with us and you'll see it. So of course, I went banding with them up in Saskatchewan, and sure enough, in an extremely specific context of high extreme danger to a just about fledged owl, it's usually if there's a dog around, not always, and then either or both of the adults might do it, but not always. They'll do putting a wing out, or they might kind of flutter around like this, and they do an accompanying kind of a that's very similar to a copulation squeal. Like, whoa, who knew they did that? But it's only in this excruciatingly specific context. And then also one other thing I don't have time to put everything in this presentation. One time, all the owls, when they had kids in our breeding project, were super alert. And I was hearing this really high-pitched squeaky sound. I'm like, what on earth could be making that sound? And then finally, I saw one of our owls, his shoulders was moving, his back was to the camera, but they were moving with the vocalization. And I realized it was a juvenile doing the whack, whack alarm call. And when he did it, none of the other owls would do it. Only one in the family group would do it. So there's some things that are just extremely context specific.
Okay, we've got several questions. One was, I heard the avian flu was going around last winter and the great horned owls in the Twin Cities were hit by it. Any more info about last year?
That's a question for the Raptor Center, because I don't deal with that directly, and I didn't wind up getting calls about birds that had it. So I can't answer that one specifically.
I had, it was the year before that, we really had a problem with the avian flu.
Yep.
I didn't know about so much last year. All right. How do owls hoot since not through their mouths?
The sound comes out their nostrils. So, and it's funny to see, because if a bird, like one of our captive birds, picks up a piece of food and hoots, then you get ha, 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 ha. But otherwise, mouth is closed, throat is puffed out, but it's not just like forced out because of the air. They can puff it out before the sound comes out, and then the sound's coming out their nostrils.
Okay, typically how large in square miles would a great horned owl pair territory be in the suburb versus a forested or rural area?
Good question. So it's all about how good the habitat is. So I can say around here, it's usually, but probably varies, somewhere in the ballpark of a square mile. If you had lots and lots of food in a suburb, it could be less than that, or it could be more than that. Tori Hartley Cox was doing some telemetry work in the what do you call it? It's in Saskatchewan, the Grasslands National Monument on the Canadian side, just on the other side of the US border, tracking great horned owl movements, owls that were nesting, because they have so many rare species there and they were worried about them eating the rare species. And hugely different hunting ranges for the birds that were in grassland areas versus cropland areas versus more treed areas. So it's all about the habitat, and it can vary enormously.
One complimentary one saying that they really liked the presentation. The next one, when will construction start on the new center and approximate completion date?
Totally depends on fundraising. So if the fundraising goes really fast, it'll happen faster. If it goes slow, it'll take longer. So we're hoping to start the silent phase this winter. The builders have said it'll take about a year to do the construction. So once we've got the construction plans and the bids are let, it'll take a year, but it's just totally dependent on how long the fundraising phase takes.
How long do owls live? Do owls live? Let's see, it just moved on me. Are owls a threat to domestic animals, cats, dogs, ducks?
How long do owls live depends on the species. And of course, captive ones are generally going to live longer than wild ones, usually. But we know in great horned owls, there have been 2 banded ones that lived about 28 years. In captivity, I know they've done at least 38. There was one that was supposedly 50. So they're capable of living a long time. Most of them don't make it that long. And then it's kind of the opposite of dogs. Usually the larger owls live longer and the smaller owls live shorter. So a saw-whet owl is not going to have as long of a lifespan, or a burrowing owl won't have as long of a lifespan. But then you can get some bizarre situations. I've heard of some pygmy owls in captivity living to be like 19. That's like insanely long. So it just varies a lot. And are owls a threat to domestic animals, cats, dogs, ducks? They can be. It's not like they say, oh yes, I'm going to go have dog, cat, or duck for supper. They're generalists, whatever is available, and probably partly driven by how hungry are you? Because if you're really hungry and desperate, you're probably more likely to go for a pet, because if you think about it, a cat is a pretty formidable predator, as long as it's a kitten, different story, but a cat, you probably don't want to tangle with them unless you really need to, or, maybe they're young and dumb and they don't have enough experience to realize, whoa, maybe you shouldn't tangle with a cat. Do they? Sometimes, yes. Go for cats. Dogs under 5 pounds are, you shouldn't leave those outside unattended, because when it comes down to it, a pet they're part of the food chain when they go outside. You're a bird club, you guys all know this. There's no little blinking neon sign that says, I'm a pet, I'm exempt from the food chain. They're part of it. They're killing things, and things can catch and kill them when they're outside. And ducks certainly also can be on the menu for great horned owls. Interestingly, I've always thought of great horned owls being the ones that go for cats, dogs, and ducks, things like that. Emily Fountain and her students over at UW-Madison are doing a diet study on barred owls, and they're doing it genetically. They're doing swabs of the intestines and DNA analysis, because that's going to pick up things that aren't going to show up in pellet contents or things like that. And they have gotten cat DNA out of the intestines of a barred owl, not great horn, barred. I thought, whoa, how did that happen? Was it scavenging? That's possible. Or did it actually kill a kitten or something like that? Don't know.
Another real positive comment saying a fantastic presentation. They appreciated ways to distinguish calls and love the map of the little owl patent place and their movements and trades, so to speak. gives us more to notice out there.
It does, because if you learn the owls in your backyard, and I assume most of you are around someplace where you can hear an owl at some point in time, if you learn their voices as individuals, this is playing out everywhere. But listen closely. You can tell male from female, both by rhythm and by frequency. Usually females are higher pitched than males, even though they have a larger body. But this is happening everywhere. All you got to do is listen really close. So my good friend Marianne Savelsberg studies eagle owls in the Netherlands, and she's got, you think this is a soap opera? They're doing lots of mate swapping over there, and in the fall when they're done, this female's visiting that male over there, and it's like, woo, hey, are you having a little fling there now that you're done raising the kids? What the heck's going on here? And then, you know, in Finland, where they've done extensive banding of boreal owls, and they know they've got the whole family trees, and dad's breeding with daughter, and whoa, you can't make this stuff up. But it's cool that you can learn this stuff just by voice. It's non-intrusive. You're not catching the owls. You're not stressing the owls, but you can understand what's going on just by knowing their language and identifying them as individuals.
Well, Karla, thank you so much. This has been just a wonderful, wonderful presentation. I've learned a
You're
lot
welcome.
and laughed a lot, and and really enjoyed the information. So
Great.
I think with that, we'll let you get back to your owls.
Okay, it's time for supper for everybody. Time to go
Yeah,
gut some
exactly.
rats.
So, and thank you everybody for joining this evening. I truly appreciate it. Talk to you later.
We'll close her out.
All right, thanks.